James's buffer. The engines swayed and lurched. At last, got him, he shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control.
Old Iron is another classic Thomas and Friends episode, one that sticks out not only to me but to most Thomas and Friends fans as well, as what exactly happens in this episode is unordinary to say the least. And to explain what I mean by that, two kids literally hop onto James's footplate, mess with his controls, and send him down the line as a runaway train. And what do you think they do to stop that said runaway? Well, you probably already know. They send Edward after James at full speed, and from there attempt to lasso his buffer to not only slow James down but to get a crew onto him to stop him completely. And as we know, Edward is successful in doing just that. And after some praise from Sir Topham Hatt, the day is officially saved and everything ends up alright, just as a quick recap. And now that we have what we do know out of the way, what may be a shocker to some people is that this event actually happened, or at least is based off of real life events. Since I've started the True Story series, Old Iron has been one of the most requested episodes, and admittedly I didn't think there even was a true story behind it. But after consulting the Thomas and Friends database, as well as after doing a bit more research, I was able to find an event that parallels this quite well. And though, as you'll see, not every detail matches up, I still feel as if this particular event is at least credible. And of course, that's what we're going to get into today. Apologies for it taking so long, but without further ado, let's get into what I think could be the real-life inspiration for Old Iron. This particular event would take place in Alton, Illinois, and from the small clipping from the Railway Gazette is dated August 1st, 1947. The small clipping titled Railroad Rodeo details that a railway engine started out on its own. How? No one knows, from the yards at Alton, Illinois the other day. Traffic was diverted out of its way along all main lines, and 25 miles down the tracks, another engine waited on the side until the runaway passed. Then, driver Robert Tipple and his crew gave chase and gradually caught up. With some extreme maneuvering, Tipple held his engine sufficiently close enough for the crew to couple the two together. With the runaway quote-unquote lassoed, just like the cowboys rope a steer, members of the crew climbed aboard and shut off the runaway's power. By that time, it had traveled over 50 miles. So, while no actual lasso was used, you can see where the term and possible inspiration may have come from. Truth be told, this event sounds more like Unstoppable than it does Old Iron. And while the clipping itself may be small, the story itself doesn't end here, as members of the Real Lives database were actually able to get an interview with a witness of this event. And that's what I'd like to read to you guys now. It starts off with saying, "I'm looking for more information about the capture of a runaway locomotive that took place at or before 1954, near Alton, Illinois. It was apparently noted in the Daily Express and reprinted in the Railway Gazette in the UK in 1954. The apparently driverless locomotive was captured when the pursuing engine caught up along the side, whereupon a railway man stood on the pursuing engine's footplate and managed to harness a loop of heavy rope around the fleeting engine's front buffers. The rescue engine then gradually applied the brakes until both were stopped." Now might also be a good time to mention that the clipping was found after this interview, so that explains why he's following more directly what happens in the episode. They would soon get a response from Bill Dunbar, a retired train dispatcher, who actually worked on the railroad that this would take place on the GM&O, and he would have this to say in response. "I do indeed remember that incident, and must say the account cited above sounds as if a Hollywood screenwriter reworked the details. The runaway engine was a diesel switcher, one of the GM&O's Alco S2s. Northward Freight Train number 28 had passed Godfrey, a junction north of Alton and part of the Alton switching district. I'm not sure at this late date, but believe the switcher probably followed 28 up the hill from Juan, a rather commonplace move back then. It was left unattended for a short time within the interlocking limits when, shortly before 3 p.m., it began to move and entered the northward main track. This was reported to Jim Simons, the first trick train dispatcher at Bloomington. Second trick dispatcher, Elmer Cooney Lakin, had just arrived to relieve him, and Jim was only too happy to vacate the chair. Elmer gave the telegrapher at Brighton Tower a message for number 28, telling them that the runaway was following. When the wild engine passed Brighton, it was possible to estimate its speed, which wasn't too terribly fast, and a message was hooped up to 28 at Shipman with the information. 28's engineer regulated his speed to a little less than that of the runaway, which then gradually narrowed the gap. When it came into sight, 28's conductor was able to advise his engineer by radio what was happening, and in a short time the switcher tied into 28's caboose. The flagman jumped across and shut the runaway's throttle. 28's engineer stopped the train and the escapade was over." No damage was done, except that dispatcher Lakin soon came down with a case of shingles as a result of the stress caused. From that time, it was mandatory that diesel engines could not be left idling unattended, unless the reverser handle was removed from the control stand. That was more than 60 years ago, so my recollection may not be 100% accurate, but it's a lot more than that story from England. And with that, we have the real-life counterpart to Old Iron from someone who was actually there. While this event involved ALC OS2s, rather than British steam locomotives, the inspiration is still clearly there. And while the events of the episode may play out a bit differently, the peril that must have been shared in both situations is almost identical. And part of me feels like that's more what Audrey was going for rather than trying to recreate this event detail for detail with his locomotives. And after having both stories, personally I can say he did a damn good job at this. The real ending to the interview is quite wholesome, as they would actually end up sending that small clipping to Bill Dunbar, where he would not only express his thanks, but promise to share it with other old-timers who had remembered the incident, giving him and possibly several others a good memory to look back on. And if I'm honest, it's these kind of stories that I really look for in the true story databases. While it's true that train wrecks are often horrible and lives are often lost in them, hearing about an event where teamwork would negate that not only is a lot nicer to read about, but I also feel as if drives home that Thomas and Friends point a little bit more. A story where teamwork and determination stop what could be a horrible accident fits perfectly in the Thomas and Friends world, and converting an event like this into a children's story, especially if the real event has a happy ending, would be and was a piece of cake for Audrey to write. And as these episodes commonly leave me, once again I'm impressed with the Reverend for being able to do such, and now I have even more respect and appreciation for this episode that I grew up watching, and hopefully you guys do too. Before I go, I also wanted to explain and apologize again for not uploading yesterday, as recently I had a family member pass and as such have been occupied with that. And while admittedly things like this are always hard to deal with and especially sad, I can't thank you guys enough for all the support that you guys have shown during this time, and I don't want you guys to think for a second that it goes unheard. Anytime I find myself in a rut or just down recently, I've been able to depend on you guys to help bring me back up again, and this situation has been no different. Not only does it help to keep a smile on my face, but also motivates me to keep going with this content that I make. And no matter how stressful it gets, it's amazing to know that you guys have my back. I truly can't thank you guys enough for everything that you've done, and I can't wait to pay you guys back with even more of this content that I love making. So with all that being said, not only thank you to you guys for watching, but thank you to you guys for everything that you do, and be sure you're keeping your all's heads up too. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.